Okay, let's talk a bit more about criminal law. Criminal law was a lot, I'm not going to lie, so I'm going to try and be as concise but as informative as possible as we go over the concepts of criminal law. An important thing to note is that this course is about criminal law and not criminal procedure. So we're not going to be talking about arrests and trying a defendant, but instead we're going to be talking about the statutes, the rules upon which a defendant is going to be tried. So we're going to be talking about the methodology more than the enforceability, making sure that we find that guilt or don't find that guilt in criminal law. Okay, so things that we're going to be covering in this course, we're going to be going over the principles of criminal law, and I should note this course, not this episode. Going over the principles of criminal law, we're going to do the building blocks of criminal liability. We're going to talk about specific crimes, such as homicide. We're going to talk about specific defenses, such as justifications or excuses. And then we're going to talk about a certain number of themes. We're going to talk about how policy and applications put together and public applications create legal rules. We're going to talk about criminal methodology, which is what I mentioned at the very beginning, and focus a lot on the statutory interpretation of that methodology. And then finally, we're going to be focusing on common law and not focusing on comparing the common law to the model penal code. Those are going to be our main themes over this semester. Like I mentioned before, we're not going to be focusing on arrests, searches, trials, criminal procedure, anything like that. We're also not going to be focusing on the difference between federal criminal law and state criminal law because that's too specific. And we won't be focusing on trial practice. We're going to be focusing only on criminal substance. Most of our content is going to be on legal analysis, and it's going to be how criminal law decisions are made. Okay, so let's go into the reading just a bit. We read from Hart, which gives us the characteristics of criminal law, which I believe are seen as pretty universal. He does have some differences of opinion, but these, I think, seem pretty standard. So, criminal law means that you are given a command, and then that subject, and those command binds subjects to obedience to the command, and those subjects have consequences for disobedience. So those are the three main accepted ones, but he goes on to argue that there are two more. The fourth one is that there's community condemnation for disobedience to these commandments. And fifth is that enforcement of this is not a threat, but it's actually going to happen. Punishment is going to occur. So those are the 5 characteristics of criminal law. You're given commands. Those commands bind the subjects. The subjects have consequences for disobedience. There's condemnation by the community, and punishment is enforced. But for a statute to be considered a law, there must be 4 features. First, a person must be aware of the existence of that law. They must know the facts that make the situation applicable to law. A person must be able to comply with the law, and a person must be willing to comply with the law. So able and willing. Those are the 4 things that make a statute a statute. Now, criminal law, we talked about this in the past. With a whole lot of other forms of law, but criminal law comes from English common law. The history of it is all criminal law in England was common, but when the United States formed their own constitution, they codified a lot of those things into statutes. However, they left a lot of gaps, so the courts were required to fill in a lot of those gaps with more common law. And then the legislature takes those, and what we have is the ALI coming up with the model penal code, I apologize, which seeks its best to come up with a whole bunch of standards for what you can do for criminal law. Okay, so besides the origins of criminal law, we talked about reasonable doubt, making sure that you find beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's interesting that it appears beyond a reasonable doubt is a standard for more than just murder. You hear that mostly in murder cases, but the prosecuting authority needs to provide beyond a reasonable doubt in the elements of law that they're trying to prosecute. So, for example, say your parents give you a curfew, and that curfew is between, you need to be home by 10 p.m. Saturday night through Sunday. Excuse me. Saturday and Sunday nights. You know what, we're just going to scratch that example. I can't articulate it well enough to be able to use it effectively for my own purposes. Excuse me, I've got a really bad tickle in my throat. I really apologize. Okay, let's talk about the reasonable doubt instructions, though. It's interesting. There seems to be about 4 common instructions that talk about moral certainty, firmly convinced, no wave of or facilitation, and no real doubt. Those are the things that we really focused on. Next time we're going to be talking about punishment and why we punish, and there's going to be a lot of philosophy about punishment. And that was criminal law. It was much more abstract than I was expecting it to be. Lots of philosophy behind it, which should be interesting. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Law Schoolers. Before I let you go, there are 4 things I want to say. The first thing is, if you enjoyed these episodes and if you enjoyed the website, I would invite you to go and join Law Schoolers Pro. And you can do that by going to lawschoolers.com/join. It's a way for you to support us, but there's also a lot of features there that I think you will enjoy. Second thing is that nearly all of our episodes are unedited. The only ones that aren't are pre-law materials, and the reason for that is so you can actually see the legal material in its raw form as I'm learning it as well. The third thing is that the information contained in these episodes are specifically only for educational purposes. They're not to be used as legal advice, and with that, the fourth thing is, if it is used as legal advice, we are not liable. That is, Law Schoolers is not liable for any legal outcomes. Thank you again for enjoying the show. Have a good one.